Hey, welcome back. Today we're gonna quickly do a pre-release analysis on the new coming 5-star character Ganyu, and we are also gonna review our previous pre-release analysis, which is Albedo. Between the release of this video and the actual character release, her number might be different. They could be buffed, nerfed, or adjusted, so it might not be a exact representation of the final product. But this is not going to be a should you roll or you should 100% roll for this character. Instead, you should be making the ultimate decision yourself, especially if you are a free-to-play player or a life-spanning player. There's nothing wrong with rolling for a character if you like their design, their looks, or their gameplay. Anyway, let's get started. Starting off with the base stats. Ganyu have the same base attack as the Luke, and she get critical damage on Ascension instead of critical rate, which the Luke gets. And as we know, getting critical damage on Ascension is really good because critical scale really well the more you build it. So this will scale really well into late game. And then follow up with her basic attack, which is the main selling point of main DPS Ganyu, because she has insanely high scaling on her charge shot attack. At level 6, she has a 180% on the first charge shot and followed by a AoE bloom of about 300%. And it totaled to about 480%. For comparison purpose, for Child or Tartaglia elemental burst in his melee form is able to do approximately like 800% in total when you consider the melee form of the elemental burst and the follow-up damage. So Ganyu charge shot does approximately a bit more than half. Not to mention, when using a charge attack, you are able to hit weak spot, which are guaranteed critical strike, meaning that you do not have to build critical rate and instead you can funnel all your stat into critical damage. And you can factor in melts on top of that as well for 1.5x damage. So in terms of DPS, Ganyu charge shot might be the highest we have seen in terms of potential DPS, but there are a lot of potential problems as well that I don't really see other people talking about. A huge amount of Chinese beta test server player who played a Ganyu commented on this exact same problem, and that is the fact that you have to use charge shot. And in fact, they're the fundamental problem of charge shot in general. The first thing is that charge shot you can miss, meaning that if you do not hit a target, your DPS go from really high to 0 all the way. Aside from hitting the target, to achieve the highest damage potential, you want to hit weak spot, not just hitting the target. This again is another problem that you have to adjust to. And of course, the second problem of charge shot is that it takes time to charge up. In this clip, you can see that Ganyu take approximately 2 seconds for her arrow to charge to the final state of the arrow. And of course, during charging, you can get interrupted by either a mob hitting you, or you might be forced to interrupt them if a mob is running at you with the intention of attacking you. Finally, while we briefly talked about how melts have high damage scaling, it is very difficult currently in the game to apply pyro consistently at a range position. The exception of this might be Ember charge shot, which apply pyro. However, with the problem we described just now of using charge shot, this might not be a realistic feasible solution. Not to mention that having to do 2 charge shots back to back will delay your DPS by a lot. At the end of the day, being able to aim and hit charge shot might vary from a player to player skill difference. Or maybe it can even come down to a platform difference. For example, personally, I only play on PC, but I know there are players who play on PS4 who have to use controller, or maybe even mobile player, and aiming charge shot and hitting weak spot might not be the easiest thing for them to do, if it's even feasible to do in a mid-battle situation such as Abyss. Personally, I don't have much experience playing on those platforms, but if you are a player on those platforms, for example mobile, and you think that charge shot is completely unplayable on mobile, please comment below. I would like to know your thoughts. With that in mind, we'll move on to Ganyu's E elemental skill ability, which is Ice Lotus. It drops a Ice Lotus on the ground, taunting all enemy nearby and dash backward. Very similar to Mona or Ember. Is actually more similar to Ember because it has a durability on it, meaning that the monster can destroy it. but it also only do 2 instances of cryo damage, one at the beginning and one and it explode, very similar to Amber's. miHoYo might have the intention for you to taunt the enemy around you so that you can freely aim your charge shot at the enemy. However, it only has a 6-second duration, meaning that you can potentially only get at most 2 charge shots within the taunt. Not to mention that it has a cooldown of 10 seconds. So there's gonna be downtime, and if you are relying on the taunt to be able to hit your charge shot, you are gonna lose DPS since your taunt is not gonna be up all the time. Not to mention, if you have experience with Amber Taunt or Mona Taunt, you would know that they're not actually that reliable to begin with, especially in a room with a lot of enemy, where 1 or 2 or enemy is not gonna get taunted and they're gonna come charging at you and attacking you. Finally, we move on to her Elemental Burst, which might actually be the best part of her kit. Her Elemental Burst have really high area of coverage, is able to cover a lot of range. It has a duration of 15 seconds and a cooldown of 20 seconds with only a 60 energy cost. Due to the long cooldown, this energy cost is actually really low, meaning that it is actually feasible to keep it up permanently, and so you'll have a 75% uptime on the cryo field. As far as I'm aware, the ice shard is actually a pseudo random drop location, meaning that some ice shard is going to guarantee to hit the enemy, while other ice shard is going to drop at random location of the field. So the damage here is hard to say until we test it out. Although the utility here that I bring might be really great, as it's able to provide constant cryo application. This might work really well for your pyro DPS to do melt damage, which is 2x instead of vaporize, which is only 1.5. Not to mention, with the passive talent unlocked, she is able to provide a 20% cryo damage bonus to active party member. So she could potentially be really good support for a double cryo team. However, I'm not sure if she's going to be better than Chongyun as a support. Speaking of passive talent, she also have another passive talent, which is increase the critical rate of subsequent charge shot after you have fired a charge shot. Now this is interesting to me, but it's also weird to me because as we mentioned at the beginning of the video, hitting a charge shot on the weak spot is a automatical critical strike, and so you do not need critical rate. So the value that this talent provide might not be as big. Finally, we move on to her constellation. The biggest one that I want to point out here is actually her constellation 6, which is eliminating the charging time after you have cast your E. And if you recall that we point out how that Ganyu charge shot might have really high potential damage, but it suffered from the problem of you have to charge up your charge shot. This completely eliminates all the charging problem that you will have. And so this is a really huge constellation. A lot of the Chinese beta tester commented on that Ganyu main DPS is potentially only playable after you have C6. So I don't like this very much because it's a huge gate wall. Overall, for my personal conclusion, while Ganyu might have really high damage as a main DPS, being able to utilize her high scaling charge shot, the charge shot playstyle is not for everyone and it comes with a lot of practical problem, especially if you are a average skill player or maybe a low casual skill player, or maybe if you're unfamiliar with, for example, FPS playstyle, or maybe if you're just even on a different platform that's not computer such as PS4 or mobile, where currently there are no aim assist system in the game. So for those players, you might have to demo her to a support instead, but I'm not really too confident in her support capability. For Pyro team, you already have something like Xingqiu, who is known to provide really consistent water infusion for your Vaporize. And while Melt might do more damage than Vaporize, it comes down to how consistent you are able to do it. And for a crowd support perspective, I don't really think that she provides more utility than the 2 current crowd healer, which is Diona and Chi-Chi. And from a crowd damage support perspective, where you probably want to run 2 cryo for the resonance, and your main DPS is potentially going to be your Kaya, so your Kaya cryo team. I don't think that Diona Ganyu going to replace Chongyun in the Kaya permafreeze team. Or if you're running the superconduct variant, then maybe you can fit her in, but I still think it's going to be hard to fit her in. At best, I think that she's going to be a average power level character. However, for me personally, I'm still going to roll her because I have a lot of primal gems saved up, and she's truly the Coco go after all. So that's it for Ganyu. Now moving on to the next topic, which is reviewing our Albedo review that we made 2 weeks ago. Between the release of that video and Albedo release, he got a pretty huge buff, which is like 50% more defense scaling on his elemental skill. So Albedo's main problem that we got correct is that he has split scaling, which makes him hard to scale into late game. In fact, because he doesn't have defense scaling on his elemental burst at all, a lot of the player are opting not to cast his elemental burst at all because it wastes time and you're potentially losing DPS uptime. In terms of neutral, I called it Albedo hard to fit into team composition because he's a Geo character, so unless you're running double Geo, it'd be hard to find a spot for him. But with the new Abyss no longer requiring breaking elemental shield, a lot of the players are finding really easy to just slotting him into any team. Although I think this is more of a Abyss no longer requiring shield kind of thing, so I'm going to put this into neutral. I also call that the 125 elemental mastery on his elemental burst kind of useless, since he's going to be in a Geo position, and so elemental mastery doesn't really do anything. Although I have also heard a report from a player that the 125 extra elemental mastery is nice if you ever put him in like Pyro team utilizing melts, for example, like the Xingqiu. Although recently in our elemental mastery series we discovered that elemental mastery is not really too good, and in the Deluxe Xingqiu example it actually messes up the combo because it consumes some of the hydro. So once again we'll put this in neutral as well. As for the negative, we didn't consider that how cheap it'll be to build him or how easy it'll be to play him due to him having really good base stats, or the fact that you just have to put his E down and that's his entire job is done. Although that's kind of boring, but it's still a easy to play characters. And so for that, we kind of got it wrong, and it does bump Albedo from a bad character to a okay, acceptable character. And that's it for this video. We're probably gonna do another review whenever the next character come out, which is probably Xiao, and then at that time we will review this video again to see what we got about Ganyu and what we got wrong about Ganyu. See you guys next time.